Welcome, everyone. I would like to give you a heads up that this is going to be an audience participation panel. So if you think of a question that you want, don't hesitate to get to the microphone early because I'll start calling on you. But I'd like to introduce from my far right, an extraordinary group of people who have invested in gender parity, equality, global health, and have been part of every big conversation that's ever been held in this arena. Mosoka Fallah is the Deputy Director General of the National Public Health Institute in Liberia. Gary Darmstadt is the Associate Dean of Maternal and Child Health, and he is the Chair in Gender and in Health and Development Lancet Series here at Stanford. Piot, who I never get to see enough in my life, is the Director of London School for Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Our disruptor at large, Steve Davis, who is the CEO of PATH, and Aparna Mehrotra. She is our representative from the United Nations, and she's a senior advisor and focal point for women. So it's a pleasure to have all of you. I have asked everyone to make this a conversation, not just a Q&A. So I am going to start with a distinguished woman to my right, because in the private sector, as we've talked so much about putting more women on boards and making women get C-suites, there has been a real talk about return on investment, the ROI of what it means to put women in power. And I got a little pushback from my friend here that ROI may not be the way to talk about women in power, but something called coherence.
Well, good morning. How are you all? Thank you it's a great pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I've always had qualms about talking about the return on investment on women. I have never seen anyone ask for returns on investment on men. I disagree with and will never support us asking standards of women that have for centuries never been asked of men. We do not have a wonderful world, which I think we have a long way to go to make it infinitely better, and we're all very committed to doing that. It's better than it was in the 15th century, I'm sure. But we also have seen, women's rights wax and wane, and it's one of those few rights which seem to wane when other rights never do. So I think that I cannot really support even the question of why we should talk about a return on investment of women. It's true, we have much to give. All the GDP, for example, it'll go up 26% worldwide, 12 trillion, I think McKinsey says, if we treated women equally and included them in an equal way in everything that we do in our work and our life. So it's very clear that we bring value to the table. But what I've always believed is that we have value because we are who we are, because we were born. And that's why we need to be valued, not because we are some sort of instrument for some investment business. We're not a business model. So that's really my very emphatic answer to this question of return on investment.
So Steve, from a business standpoint, you really have been disruptive among multiple venues. We are here to talk about leveling the playing field, finding partners with strong men, getting women into higher leadership positions. Is ROI the wrong way to look at it?
Well, first of all, as the first man to speak today from the, I wanted to say you're not alone. We're here. We're here listening and want to engage, and I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation. And I have an appointment here at Stanford, so I'm delighted that Stanford is also the home of this first conversation. So I don't think that ROI is the way to go about doing this work at all. And that I'm an ex-McKinsey technology guy, so there's that. It's now look, I look at this in a fairly complicated lens. I cut my teeth as a gay activist, an AIDS activist. I cut my teeth in international human rights, but then I spent much of my career in places like consulting firms and as a technology leader, and in places like Silicon Valley, where there are some serious flaws in the way women and men are managing their relationships in this community. And so it's a complicated one. I think we need to move from sort of an ROI discussion to, and almost a why is this a problem? We stated the problem. I don't think anybody disagrees the problem. A lot of people don't understand the problem and aren't listening to it, but what can we start doing to actually, think about changing
How can we make it a non-problem?
Yeah, well, so I put on 3 hats real quick. One is my global citizen participant hat. And I know I and others like me have to learn to listen more. That's the fundamental piece as a human that I think that men miss over and over again. Listening, understanding unconscious bias. How do we, even with good intention, I trip every day that I'm saying something, doing something that I'm surprised at myself when I think about it, that what the implication could be. As a leader, manager of a large organization or other organizations, I think there's a whole bunch of structural things we have to be doing more. I'm a big advocate of asking people, all of leadership, but women leaders in particular, to get active in boards. There's ways to engage in the community that we don't traditionally think about that are actually quite empowering. But also, trying to ensure in our organization that we are working hard at career development opportunities and other things to make sure that we have the majority women workforce. We've got our senior leadership at the executive level in our board is very even, but where we miss is those key technical leadership slots. And then I think my biggest challenge is thinking about it as an activist and technology or innovation leader. I think the other thing we have to start talking about in global health is the outrage that all of us should feel, men and women, that we're not addressing some of the hardest issues that are women's issues, women-oriented issues. I was at a thing yesterday on female genital mutilation. Where are we going with that? What are we going to do to change the unconscious bias in research, where we're not just disaggregating data by gender, but we're actually doing research oriented toward certain cohorts? What are we doing? Why has there not been a global pledging conference on cervical cancer? It's outrageous that we're still letting women die of cervical cancer just because they're the last ones getting serviced in communities around the world. So I just feel like there's both a structural and a cultural, but there's also a real, set of issues that we as a community of women and men have to start addressing in a more aggressive way.
Peter, one of the mandates of this panel was the power of men and relationships with women and how we make each other better in the workplace. Your hospital probably leads most others in that fight.
I hope so. First of all, we're very proud that next year's conference will be hosted at the London School of Hygiene Tropical Medicine. And I think it'll be quite a different conversation because the cultures of gender relations are very, very different from one place to another. But the basic problems are the same, just the expression. Now, at the London School of Hygiene Tropical Medicine, when you look at the statistics, we're doing better than any other university in the UK. 38% of full professors are women. I report, my boss is a woman. That's, she's actually from Texas, and I'm from Belgium and we're in the UK, but that's, we're citizens of the world. But that's, when you look at our structures and at senior level and so on, I think we're doing quite well. Also, something that came up and that Glenda Gray alluded to, when you look at success rates of obtaining research grants, which is, of course, in academia, one of the big indicators, women in our place are doing better than men. And we also are the best in the country in terms of obtaining grants for women as compared to men, because in general, it's the other way around. So and I don't honestly know why we're different and why we're better. Now, there's also something that the UK has done. We have the first female chief medical officer. Now, in the UK, a chief medical officer is quite a powerful position, quite independent, holds the government to account on terms of health issues. And that's Sally Davis, and she was the head of the National Institute for Health Research. It's mostly clinical type of research in health. And she said that by 2020, I think, all universities who want to benefit from this kind of research funding need to have a silver award in Athena Swan. That is an indicator of how you're doing in terms of gender. It's not only men. And that created panic in medical schools throughout the country because nobody really complied with it. But that's an example of a very top-down, quite a dictatorial type of decision. And this is what we're going to do. And it is really inducing change in the statistics, but not necessarily in culture. And so that's one of the reasons that I started a program called Aurora, which is providing leadership training and mentoring for women. It can be an assistant, it can be a professor, doesn't matter. So we try not to do it just for academics.
So mentoring young women is as important a piece of this breaking this glass ceiling that we all feel. The mentorships, doesn't matter what gender someone is. We need to recognize talents in young people who want to aspire to be full professors, to run universities. It's the role models. Actually, I think it starts at home, in the family. And but as Mampele said also, we have the transgenerational impacts that are there. And I think at education, but it's this, having the role models, that's why we have lectures of women leaders and so on. I mean, it's a whole agenda, but that's kind of comes naturally. For me, I mean, being here, I feel completely at ease. There's no problem. I don't feel threatened or whatever, but there's also the reality is that in order to, to achieve gender parity or equity or whatever we call it, men will have to give up something. But I always say it's going to be better for men as well. Mosoka,
because
you're nodding.
Finally, we can be ourselves. And one thing I'm missing here is that the debate is pretty binary. Now, young people today, there's quite a fluidity in gender, patterns and so on. And that I find is pretty absent from the conversation.
Right.
And and that's the, let's say, gender parity 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever. And since we're in Silicon Valley, I have to say that. So I think that there is a big need for us, for men here. Our work I see in the first place in our own communities. And stand up. I mean, it's like one of the things that we've told anybody who's lecturing, that's when racist or sexist or homophobic comments are made by students, and that can be based on deeply grounded cultural norms, that we have to say, wait a minute, let's discuss this, and not just say, that's fine, or there is a limit of how far you can understand, quote unquote, what are our values, and that's what we as a school we stand for, and that's about culture. But we still have a very big, long way to go. And one area I see that where men are far more at risk in terms of health than women. When you look at decline in life expectancy in this country, it's white men. When you look at coverage for antiretroviral therapy in Africa, it's men who are the least. Suicide in men under 50 in the UK is an epidemic, not in women. I'm not saying that we shouldn't work on the third.
Then women become the caretakers.
But yes, and so we have very complex issues and we have a lot of work to do in our own, in our own kind of gender or whatever we call it these days.
Before we open this up, Mosoka, you were nodding that men are going to have to give something up. What's your experience in Liberia?
Like you said, the issues are usually driven by culture. So the culture in which I grew up in personally, where women had to play a subservient role. When men sit, the women have to pass among the men. In Liberia, for instance, I have to report to the Minister of Health. She's a female. I have to work with the university president, the recently appointed. It's a female. But I have to treat them with the respect that they deserve, and I have to do the work, and so we build a strong partnership. I can't be seen as the male dominant one. I have to take instructions from them. But that has led into me positioning myself to assist a lot of other young women. For instance, a few weeks ago, I was in Morocco meeting a group of young Liberians, and I met this young, brilliant female who had done her master's and bachelor's in geology, was trying to find her niche in Liberia, but no one would listen to her. And I said, well, I will get back to Liberia, and I will see how I'll get back to you. I got to Liberia, took the phone and called the president of the university and said, is it possible to bring this young woman back from Morocco? She wants to become a professor and eventually get a PhD. She said, if it's from you, Mosoka, I'm going to listen to you. And she got accepted. But shift the narrative around. There is another young female, 14 years old, who was raped by an uncle who happened to be in the House of Representatives. And he has been shielded from the law by his colleagues. And because of the structural issues, the families are poor. And there's no way that they can reach. In fact, the family have been given some money, and they are having this lady that have developed fistula. Her future is damaged, but because of poverty. The lesson I'm trying to draw is that when we place ourselves in that position, we can give us some of our power as men and become colleagues. We make a greater impact in the world. And our country, in a lot of ways, you need to have women playing these strategic roles. And we the men have to see that we give up power, but we become colleagues. And the issue of women playing leadership role is that it's not an issue of return on investment, it's a fundamental issue of survival. Whenever women play the key role, our survival is enhanced.
Okay.
I think there's a different way to frame it. And I think in a lot of ways, men are giving up a lot without having gender equality. We're giving up a lot in terms of opportunity. We're giving up a lot, I think, in terms of richness of relationships. I think we're giving up a lot in terms of the opportunity to bond with our children, to live a fuller life. I think men are often boxed into certain stereotypic behaviors, and there's a sense of having to perform, and a sense of having to win, and to always and to compete. And I think we pay a price. I think Peter alluded to this. You look at something as simple as longevity around the world, and it's very clear that where you have greater gender equality in societies, men's longevity improves, as does women's. Everyone gains. And I think rather than thinking of it as a zero-sum game that we're giving something up, I think we're already giving up a lot, and we actually have a lot to gain. And I think we all have a lot to gain. But
That's great. With me.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Aparna.
I agree. That's what I meant when we said that we can be ourselves.
I'd just also like to add that this issue of gender inequality is very much exacerbated when you start looking at the issue of aging. And I think the issue of aging, with the shifting demographics worldwide, it's an issue with the feminine face, and it's a great issue of gender inequality, because what happens is when men's entire identity and sense of self-esteem is tied up with the traditional issues that patriarchy has, the formal sector, your role as leader, able physically and all this stuff, then that's lost. And as you lose that, you will enter old age completely with a much lower self-esteem. And what we find in some cultures is that the dominance completely changes, and you have, a different type of dominance in older age, and that's not helpful either. Yeah. So I think that the unequal roles and the psychology of inequality, when it's extended to the aging and over a certain age, I think it has a hugely detrimental effect on men, and a very much greater burden on women, who carry the burdens of inequality cumulatively through their life cycle. So that's just an issue I would like to put out there, which people generally don't talk about.
With that, we're going to open up our microphones. I want to toss out just a couple of stats while everyone feels free to come up to the mics. McKinsey was mentioned, so let me give you this. This was numbers from Lean In and McKinsey report. 50% of men think that women are well represented in leadership positions in medicine, while only 1 in 10 senior leaders is a woman. So that's something to chew on. And I think we're just going to start here and go back and forth. Would you please state your name and where you're from?
My name's Mona Lisa Muchatuta. I am an emergency physician here. I'm actually a Global Health Emergency Fellow. I'm actually originally from Zimbabwe, so I have special interests for global health. My question just kind of came to me when Peter was speaking, but anybody can feel free to answer it. You mentioned that your boss was female, and that seems, my assumption probably, that London School of School of Tropical Medicine perhaps maybe doing well because they have this person who's higher, I think it was a CMO that's higher up that has these agendas that's pushing down a lot of directives, directing increasing female workforce, perhaps not only at London, not only at the University of London, but perhaps in other medical schools across the country. It's kind of struck an analogy for me similar to health disparities when you compared countries that did well, Cuba versus democratic states. They have very high, very well-developed medical kind of sort of downward medical accessibility for a lot of people, but that there's been, and then you compare with the democratic states where it's been harder to sort of pass these.
Peter, can you comment?
What do you think? Do you think that this is what the way to go forward? Getting people with agendas to be higher up, and then push these. You're
talking about hierarchical change.
Yes.
Well, I think for any change management, it has to be a combination of top-down rules, regulations, and what have you, positive discrimination, whatever is appropriate, incentives, creating that, and on the other hand. It has to be grounded in a movement also, otherwise it won't work. And I think that's why I actually feel it's really important that this conference exists and that it's overwhelmingly, the participants are women at this stage, because you need to create this kind of movement, but we'll have to do the same for men. And that's what I meant when I say, for me, one of the main reasons that I really at ease is because we can be ourselves, as Gary just said. And I think if I'm at ease here, a lot of it is because thanks to my mother, because she said, it's not because you're a boy you shouldn't do that. I mean, it's just, retrospectively, she was very conservative, but I understood that it was a pretty gender-sensitive and equal education. That's no merit to me.
It's really clear that where men have the opportunity to be mentored by women, it really makes a difference in their views and the actions that they take. I know I personally feel like I've been mentored by my wife. I mean, she's taught me a lot at various stages as we've gone along about what does gender equality really look like, and what is it that she's looking for. And so I would really encourage women to be mentors of men. We need it.
Interesting. Yes. It's a novel idea. Yes, please, your name and where are you from?
I'm Angela Migoa, a pediatric rheumatologist from the Aga Khan University in Nairobi, Kenya. My question goes out to the gentlemen on the podium. What advice would you be willing to share with us to allow us to bring up boys who would become gentlemen who empower women so that we don't become the perpetrators against the very things we've been fighting against?
In other words, how do we raise young boys to become you guys?
Well, that's a scary thought. I think it in part goes back to what Peter is saying. I mean, there's this sort of level of integrity and inclusion in the way you create worldviews, and it's through through the modeling that we see in homes or in schools, but it's also in and what we read, what we get exposed to, what's allowed or not allowed. I think one of the fundamental issues is, whether it's as raising a child or being a teacher or being a boss or an employer, is that we don't call it soon enough when people have crossed the line. And I think we have to get stronger as men and women in saying that's not okay, you need to step back, you need to rethink. And I find even as a parent or as an executive that it's easier to just let it go. You just, okay, it's not really okay, but I just don't want to deal with that right now. And to be better about just saying, no, we're going to revisit that now. And that's whether you're in a board meeting or you're at the dinner table with your child or you're in a classroom.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Mariam Ijaz. I just defended my master's thesis in physiology like 2 days ago, and then I hopped on a plane and I'm here.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm currently applying for medical school, so that's a little bit about me. I have a question kind of going off of the question that was just asked in terms of raising kids from the start to kind of prevent this deep-seated cultural norm of and the stigma that we have around it. I guess my question is, when men have already crossed the line, what is the best way to engage them there? Like, for example, like you all being here, I guess what inspired you guys to come, or like what trajectory did your lives take for you to grow up and be sitting at a Women Leaders in Global Health, being some of the only men that could be very threatening seen to other men, and breaking down those barriers? And to go forward with that, were there any experiences in your life that you're brave enough to share where you did have a kind of a sexist mentality or a stigmatized mentality that changed? I know Peter talked about your mother being a very good support system in your life, and you spoke about your wife. So something I just want to share is, I'm sorry?
Let me just take your question first,
Sure.
so we can get this in. Would any of the gentlemen like to take this question as to, what brings you to a conference about women in leadership? And then is there any time you look back in your history where you think, this is not the person I want to be. I'm going to take another path.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate. I was raised in a house with 3 boys and 3 girls. But one of the things, my father was not highly educated, but he had equal expectations from all of us. Whether it was in academic performance, we had to do backyard gardening to go to school. When we went on the farm, my father would apportion the portion equal size with the boys and girls. And many of our neighbors didn't understand why my father had equal expectations. He didn't look at any of us as they were male and female. But that has really paid off, given the fact that each of my sisters has grown up, gotten an education, and playing decisive leadership role. In fact, the ongoing elections in my country, my sister now sits at the COM Center where she influences decisions about the elections.
So it does go back to what Peter talked about, and having someone in the home invest in you.
Yes, and having clear expectations. And having gone back and being the pro-female guy who think that we all are equal,
Right.
In many of the organizations that I run, I have to correct guys and say, no, she has equal voice like you.
Do you think, I'm going to define you all as feminists just being on this platform, but do you think you can a man can become a feminist and believe in gender parity without having a strong woman in his life at some point along that developmental path?
Yes.
You can.
There are 2 things. One is, I think you can. It's about feeling, understanding, it's about empathy at the end of the day. Can you understand how other people's lives are affecting your world? I also think there's one thing we have to be careful of is the fact that we're on this stage. I hope it means that we are giving thought to this, but we are coming in with enormous amount of, male privilege, some of us white privilege, some of us heterosexual privilege that is impossible to fully get rid of. And so, yeah, I am tripping all day long because I make assumptions because of my privilege. And I think we have to be really upfront about that.
The question here.
Radhika Shah, Stanford Angels Sustainable Development Goals Philanthropy Platform. My question is to the men on the podium. What is it going to take to have a large percent of men in the world think like you and not wait for the next generation of boys because we don't have time? This is one of the biggest human rights issues of our time. What will it take to create a movement? Will it be technology? What kind of nonlinear change or scalable innovation do we need for men to think the way Gary talked about, how he thinks of women as mentors? And a question to Aparna. At the platform, we are looking in some countries as SDG 5 empowering women as an accelerant to achieve all the SDGs. Would you see that as a way of helping men see women differently, or would you see that like the ROI issue, that is it a way of like using women in a negative way?
I think ultimately this is just a very human issue. I mean, I think it's really about fairness. I think it's about respect. It's about dignity. It's fundamentally about respecting every person as your equal. And so I don't think that there's any magical technological bullet. I think a lot of it's about conversation. I think a lot of it is about experience, empathy, as you were saying, Steve, and understanding the challenges that others have faced, for a variety of reasons, for a variety of identities that make it difficult to enjoy the equality that we enjoy. So I think it's really ultimately a human issue.
Yeah. Go ahead, Aparna.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for that question. I work for UN Women, and it took us 2 years of very hard advocacy to get Goal 5 to begin with, and then to ensure that gender is mainstreamed into all other goals. And it is definitely not a negative issue at all, because unless we are there at the table, we can't be heard. So I think what mainstreaming gender does is it gives us a place at the table, in addition to formalizing a commitment towards equality, which is absolutely imperative to changing behaviors. So the short answer is it's fantastic.
Last question, Laurie Garrett.
Oh my goodness, responsibility for me.
Sorry, we could run this panel for another half hour, I'm afraid.
Surely. I want to ask a question that many of us have struggled with going back to the 60s, I being one of the senior citizens here. So if we were having the same conversation, we're talking about racism versus talking about sexism, what's the same, what's different? How do we engage in advancing on both planes?
Yeah.
Well, this is what happens when a journalist gets the last question.
Yeah, maybe I'll be the courageous one. No. I think that, first of all, I think the reason I'm here is it's about justice and rights. That's my entry point. And so and it's natural. I mean, I could not imagine not being here. Also, my wife is organizing the next one. But I would have come in any case, and that's because that's the ethos, and it's about social justice, and that's the link between racism and sexism. Now, we also, when you look at it, social change can take a long time, but often there's a tipping point when things start moving very rapidly. And when you look at, let's say, Northwestern European countries, by all indicators, number of women in parliament, women on boards and all that, these things, it took maybe 10 years in business. It was in the public sector, it went faster. So I think that we should not assume that it's going to take another generation. I mean, the culture change, that takes generations. But that's why I'm a strong believer that we need, let's say, that's legislation, some rules and all that they can accelerate the whole process, to use that term, while we go through the changes. And I think what Ampele is sitting there somewhere, what you said about we should not underestimate the transgenerational impact. And when it comes to sexism, that's not just the time of colonization or apartheid, which was only 100 years and a bit. Here we're talking about a few, thousands of years. And And it's perpetuated by about every religion that we have also. So it's very deeply rooted in, what we have. So let's not expect miracles, but let's not count on the nice way of change. You need really laws, enforcement, rules, and so on, and then people will wake up, and that's going to accelerate it, I think.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you to this terrific panel. Have a great day.